in-house tooling at Bright Cove. Hello. That sounds, wow, that is high resolution. Well, I can't do anything about the lights. Hint. Look good? Okay, readable? A little bit.
It's hard to read. We'll have the slides posted afterwards.
The sight gags are going to work really well. Yeah, there we go.
Christina. Lights off.
All right. Hey, so I'm Danny Silverman. I'm a systems engineer at Bright Cove. This is supposed to be a lightning talk, so I'm going to try and do it in 5 minutes. And a little different than the prompt, and which is why it's good I'm going first, is I'm going to talk about our continuous delivery pipeline for configuration management and all the tools we use. And then the next presentations are all talking about individual tools. So maybe this is a good overview, and then that's a good deep dive. So here is our story. Many hundreds of instances in the cloud and on-prem, many dozens of software engineers, systems engineers, network engineers, security engineers, making changes all the time, every day. And when a change goes wrong, people notice. So in a quest to maintain our platform stability while encouraging development agility, we decided on this, which is the solution to most problems, adding additional automation and tooling. And we did that through continuous delivery. So basically the takeaway for you here is we have all these cool tools and we want to put them into practice. Once we put them into practice, we want to put them together. Once we put them together, we get happiness. And I'm going to walk you through how we've done that. It starts with your laptop. So the first thing is developers need to develop on their own machines and not on some server somewhere. So we built scripts and tooling that allows people to create a configuration management environment with Chef that closely matches what our servers do, and gave them a bunch of tasks that allow them to spin up a local Chef server, that allow them to spin up a local virtual machine to test their changes, that allow them to run spec tests and other things. So that they can locally do their work without impacting anyone else, and then they can commit that work to Git. And we maintain repositories for all of our different cookbooks in this case. And once a cookbook is put in via a pull request, it goes through a review, a peer review. So someone has to sign off on it. It's a pretty standard and super useful tool for getting a second set of eyes. And then once you have that second set of eyes, it goes through automated tests. So every pull request automatically runs a build. This build does any spec tests that are included, any linting and code quality tests that are included, and results in a big green button that you get to push, which kicks off a full test pipeline. So the master pipeline does that first set of tests all over again, just in case someone tried to get past our pull request stage without letting it complete. It gates that. Once it completes that, it goes on to the integration test portion. And this is pretty clever, and this was built in-house. And it goes through and looks at every change to every cookbook, and it looks at every role that maybe apply, if you don't know about Chef, you apply a role to a node, and then it converges that node based on that role. It looks at every role, it looks at every cookbook dependency, it looks at every transitive dependency, and it figures out what roles are going to be affected by this change. And then it spins up every single role in a Vagrant VM, and it converges that role and makes sure that it passes. And once every role that is affected passes through the pipeline, only then does the Team City worker actually upload your change cookbook. So you can't do it directly, you can't touch it directly. It has to go through this process. And once it's gotten through this process, then there's a human step, and this is why it's continuous delivery and not continuous deployment, because we still have that human step, which is that you update your environment and you say, I have this new cookbook, it's now on the server, let's apply it to QA. We go through another set of tests there before we push that out, and then Chef does its magic. Every node is converged, every node reports back success, and then we move forward, staging, production. The end result being fewer screw-ups and happier customers. So it's really a bunch of small pieces that just go together in steps that we call a pipeline because we want to be fancy, and the end result is that we have the confidence we need so that we can deploy infrastructure changes all hours of the day and feel good about them and their stability and continue to move the company forward. And so can you, because so much of the tooling that we built internally and sort of arduously by hand and all the problems we ran into over the years, you don't have to run into anymore because there's a lot of great tools out there now that do this all for you. And you're gonna learn about them tonight, things like Test Kitchen and Server Spec. I mentioned Vagrant. So if you're considering the idea of a continuous delivery pipeline and you think it's just too daunting, it's really not. You chain together these tools and you end up with something pretty cool. And if you're interested in building things like this and you can't do it where you are now, come work with us because we need to build the next generation and we're hiring. Thank you.
All right, Matthew, you want to talk about Vagrant? Tell jokes when you're setting up.
Yeah. To fill the void of silence.
Yeah.
That makes
Like,
sense.
why did the chicken cross the road?
So guys, why did the chicken cross the road?
Well, it proved to the rooster he wasn't chicken.
Very nice.
Oh, come on, man. Wait. Dave has bad jokes.
So is everybody, who here has used Vagrant before? Is everybody pretty familiar? Okay. So I can't make anything up, is what people are saying. No.
Not the same one. No.
Please stand by for rules.
Nerve-wracking when everybody's watching what we're doing, huh?
A lot more than I was prepared for. All right, moving in the right direction. about it. Here we go. Okay, so how's that? No, it's not good. You are up. All right, how's everybody doing? Sorry for that technical difficulty. My name is Matt. I'm currently working at a shop called Lucky Cricket Media. We're an early stage startup. So early, in fact, that I am the entire team in the technical department. So it finds me wearing a lot of hats, doing both development, design, and operations. It can get a little hectic, and I don't think I'd be able to do it without Vagrant. Right now it's my favorite tool, whether that's because of a lack of knowing tools, who knows. But I'm going to go over basically kind of what Dustin outlined in the meetup page, which is what is Vagrant. I use it, the workflow that I use, the community and the plugins, and there's some resources to learn more. All right, so what is Vagrant? It's an automation tool that allows you to create VMs and VM environments. Why that's cool is that it gets rid of the disparity that can happen when people are doing local development on their own machines. So everyone on your team will have the same exact environment at all times, which hopefully will reduce the problems that crop up in production. So the way Vagrant works is you have a provider. As you see here, you can use any of these major ones. They also have plugins that I'll go over in a later slide for functionality with a lot of other providers like OpenStack, etc. So once you have your provider, you can put on top of that provisioners, which, as you guys know, is Puppet, Chef, and Ansible are three of the big ones. I just right now use bash scripting. That kind of gets done what I need to do. I have a slide for that later. And so what it all bases on is the Vagrant file, which is the configuration file that holds everything you need for your project. This goes into your project directory. Pull this down from your code, your repo. Run Vagrant up with one command. You are developing. Right now, we keep this, or I keep this just in a Dropbox. So if I'm offsite, I can use this, pull it down and start working. Another cool feature is Vagrant Share, which allows you to share your boxes in the Vagrant cloud. So why use Vagrant? The main reason that I found is that if there's a problem, it works on my machine and doesn't work in production. Fosters collaboration. It allows people to work together because you can just hop into a project by getting all the dependencies and everything you need to get up and running pretty smoothly and quickly. It's reusable and disposable. Once you're done, run the command Vagrant destroy. And nothing on your local machine is changed. One of the cool features too is the multi-VM clusters. This sets up the closest that I can tell to a production environment. So for me, it's nice to be able to set the configuration with these clusters, setting up different VMs using, so I use Postgres. Also, being able to use our own tools is great. I have a lot of configuration settings on my Sublime editor. So I'm able to keep that without having to dive into Vim or something like that. Workflow. So the basic workflow is you clone your source, you Vagrant up, make changes with your own tools, commit your changes, and Vagrant destroy. What I usually do though is repackage my box. So in the process of building up a project, I put all my dependencies on that one box, run a Vagrant package command, and then save that. It saves time for the provisioning. Like I said, I don't use Chef or Puppet. I haven't taken the time to learn it yet. But it does have a bit of a time crunch to spin up when you're putting all these dependencies on your Vagrant file. So community and plugins. Vagrant works with almost everything. As you'll hear later, I think all the tools from Snide can be used with Vagrant. I use a separate Vagrant machine with Jenkins to do my integration testing. These can all be installed with Vagrant install. My favorite plugin is Vagrant VB Guest. A lot of times when I update kernels on the Linux boxes I run, the shared folders come out of sync. And so if I'm not doing NFS or rsync, this keeps everything up and running automatically. It's a good one if people should check that out. Almost done. So here are some resources. Vagrant documentation, Vagrant Cloud, we can get boxes pulled down using Vagrant Connect if you sign up for a free account. List of Vagrant boxes, just other boxes that people have created. And then, oh, and that's it. Go back and talk about the plugins. A great way to extend the way that Vagrant works. Like I said, they have them available for all the major providers. It's here somewhere. One I use too is Vagrant Trigger. It allows you to send commands after you have installed all your dependencies. And Vagrant runs its own commands. What's good about that, since I'm using bash scripts, a lot of the things I install, it installs to the root directory, which I don't need. I need that for users. And so by using the Vagrant Trigger plugin, I can send my own bash scripts or command line prompts to run the things I need afterwards. Wow. Is it hot up here? Or is it just me? So that's it. That's pretty much it. Questions, comments? Yeah, create a new box file in whatever directory you're using. And so once, yeah.
You really briefly mentioned kind of experience. But what's been your experience on plugin?
Well, I pretty much just use the virtual box connection, which is the shared folders feature. And using that plugin VB Guest has always kept it up and running. I mean, I just updated the CentOS 7 box today, and immediately my shared folder capability broke. So once I installed that plugin, it started working again without a problem.
We use Vagrant. So basically what it does is parsing the code from just sets a flash in that file. Put all this stuff in your source directory, and whenever anything changes, parsing it automatically. In our case, we're running web and we're hot reloading code basically. But like, regardless, parsing better than NFS, and it works across the other plugins. Like that's it. But it will work with me.
Thank you. In terms of pre-built boxes, if you use the, finding actual Vagrant files with configuration.
Yeah.
I haven't found a repository of that. If I kind of just Google around and see other projects that people have worked on, you get a lot of ideas from that. GitHub, obviously, but no, I haven't found. The documentation is great for base examples. Other than that, no.
You go to Apache when you're ready. Make a change when there's just not that kind of stuff.
you can kind of make it invisible so your developers don't feel like they're developing on anything other than their box. That might not be the best. Yeah, that's pretty loud.
When you were first on your team, so I guess you got to run into. I guess my question for you is if you had. As an engineer, I try to anticipate objections with my developers. Oh, favorite. I run into a lot of objections.
Right.
So,
I haven't had any issues yet. I guess it would depend on what you're doing. I mean, there are performance hits by using the shared folders. So if you weren't able to get rsync or something else working, that might be an issue. But
yeah, it's hard to tell the developer just stuff he's doing it. I agree with you. It's getting a lot better on Windows. So like the last, like, not even last, like, avoiding things like shared files and that stuff. Yes, right.
Mhm.
Like, what you're tell is basically. Yeah, the number solution better. Really works better on objects stuff.
Vagrant does ship with built-in support for hypervisor. I don't know what Windows version you're running, but would that make a difference? I use a Mac, so I don't.
Good question about it. I was just going to add that we had a bit of passive problem was, you know, that's what the development.
Telling to use their local. That's what you're saying. You can work. It is, because at some point as an engineer. So it depends on the provider. I don't know about AWS, but there are plugins that we can't have. I don't know about AWS. Yeah, there are providers.
Definitely want to swipe art.
Yeah, I know that some providers use Swift.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Let's not cross into. We want to definitely sidebar any kind of conversations because it's good collaboration. One thing that I think that'll be helpful is for comments out of the audience. If you guys can just introduce yourself first and say where you're working, gives kind of some perspective, so everybody kind of has a better understanding as to what background you guys are coming from. All right. But do we have any other comments just to get the presentations moving?
My name is Kevin, and we ship an appliance as part of our product, which is hardware. And one of the things to watch out for with Vagrant is that you have a much community-based thing. It's just like kind of there's a trade-off between either like a very long time to build up, like say like JSON quantities all the way to where you want it to be, having like intermediate images that you capture, and then if you want to go back and modify something, it's really hard to keep track of what this is. So we're a little frustrated with just the amount of time it takes to build up.
That would be it.
I've tried it out. I haven't figured it out yet though. It looks awesome though. I mean, I do want to eventually learn it.
Yeah, faster vagrant would be much better. So when you work, so you have to take the pieces apart. Like you have a vagrant file and you have shot, and you look it all up, and you're like, what if I go like immediate steps for the version and faster stalker days?
Oh, add something to it? Sure, I'm Adam Jacob, I'm the CEO. But, so the, that's why, that's why, okay, so take a snapshot and then all the data files and run it 20 times. Like you can like just take what's the amendment is you can like you just take that and then update the data file 20 times. So like let the conversion thing do kind of right. Yeah, it stops operating.
How do you like remember what all your packages are?
Because you update the data file from one to the box. You update the figure files from one to the box.
Yeah.
So then you publish it. So they probably do it now.
But providing like comments, like
No, the figure file you get, right? Like figure file and version control. Box points. And the next time. Faster one. And potential between the faster updated image and have to publish the box.
and explain like what's different from this box to that box.
No. Don't care. You don't care. Convert it. Yeah, press it.
Any other questions?
Elton Ziegler, digital developer. What do you find as a starting point for the boxes? Do you this long build times or?
Yeah, I had the same issue with like I had multiple versions of boxes as I incrementally built things up because the version just takes so long. I started just with building a base box in VirtualBox and using a Kickstart file. Tom later is going to do a presentation on Packer, which is another related tool to Vagrant that builds these boxes, automates the build process. So he puts everything on there. That might be a better question for him. So, all right, guys. Well, thank you very much. Yeah, thanks.
Networking is always simple until you get up on the podium.
How you feeling, man?
It's like this spot, you know? It's like,
There's a cone of silence right over.
there is no guest Wi-Fi network here. I'm on it. Right?
It's like windy.
What'd you do to fix it? All right.
He told some bad jokes.
Yeah, I'm out, dude. That was it.
It's actually,
I got nothing else.
Right, but I need the Wi-Fi. So I'm connected.
oh,
Yeah, I'm on BC Guest, but it's not resolving anything. On BC Guest, yep. It says it's connected.
Aaron, anything special with the Wi-Fi connection? Yeah, just so we can. Yeah, no, we connected.
I was on it like 2 minutes ago. What's that? No. Oh,
Like 2 minutes. Connect to Adam cell.
okay.
So you're hotspot on your phone.
Yeah.
Well, I hope I don't mess up then.
Make sure you don't have like any cloud sync going on in the background.
Oh yeah. Stop Dropbox.
Or don't, it's cool.
Come on. Like congratulating Ryan when I was hotspotting my phone one time. I was like, why am I tearing through my data?
It's like, at least you get a text and notify you. Your 90% is already you.
How did I get to 75% so fast? Oh yeah.
Spend $50, get some more.
Exactly. I hardly ever use this thing. And I'm like, oh. But all my data's back there.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
All right. Thank you, Adam. There we go. All right.
Now we just keep down this computer. Plug that right.
Yet. Not yet. Now. There we go. All right. Sorry about that. Hi, everyone. My name is Mike. I'm a DevOps engineer at PayPal. And I'm going to try to talk to you guys about Test Kitchen for the next 15 minutes. It's a big topic, so let's get going real fast. My team, we came from basically just Chef 10 a year and a half ago, and we would make a change, check it into Git, knife upload, and hope for the best. And we made a lot of changes in the past year and a half. Now we're on Enterprise Chef. We're pushing using automation and everything, and Test Kitchen is pretty much the reason why we were able to do that, and it saves our lives. So what is it? Why do I need it? The number one thing really is it gives you local testing. It basically wraps Vagrant for the most part. That's what most people use it for. But you can also use it for VirtualBox, well, VirtualBox and Vagrant, obviously. AWS, DigitalOcean, OpenStack, all of that stuff. Basically, there was a plugin just to do like Burke Shelf right into Vagrant. It kind of wasn't doing too well, so they worked on Test Kitchen, and it got pretty awesome. And now that's what a lot of people are using. Hey, who here is a Chef user, if you don't mind my asking? All right. Who here has used Test Kitchen? Okay, all right. So a number of people, so that's good. So let's go over the basics real quick. You have a Chef cookbook, which you want to run Test Kitchen on. In Test Kitchen, you make the choice of which drivers you want, whether you want Vagrant, AWS, DigitalOcean, whatever. Then you can run it on multiple platforms, whether it's a Ubuntu box or a CentOS or whatever type of box you want to run it on. And then you can run tests against that. Besides the normal SSHing on and seeing if it's there, you actually do busser and server spec, which Dustin's going to cover server spec in a little bit. So let's get started. Just please note I make heavy use of cooltext.com. Throwback there. So first of all, the number one step if you're not using Chef is Chef DK. It just makes your life so much easier. They package up all of the all the tools you need right now. So for beginners especially, I'd say go to Chef DK, grab that. Number 2 step is really to look at the YAML file. That's pretty much where everything in Test Kitchen lives. So let's take a look. The beginning of a Test Kitchen's file looks like this. If you spin up a new repo, the first line is driver, Vagrant. That's what it comes with default. But there's a lot of drivers: EC2, OpenStack, Azure, DigitalOcean, Docker, Rackspace, whatever. So you can use Vagrant locally, or you can spin up against AWS in the cloud, whatever you want, things like that. Next step is the provisioner. It comes with Chef Solo by default. I immediately switched this to Chef Zero for the most part. But again, there's other provisioners as well: Chef Solo, Chef Zero, Shell, Puppet, SaltStack, and I think there's a number of other ones now as well. The next section, like I mentioned earlier, platforms. You can pick, Ubuntu, CentOS. It's basically your images. The same boxes that we were just talking about with Vagrant come into play here. The cool thing with Kitchen Vagrant or Kitchen EC2, the hard work is done for you. All you have to do is type in Ubuntu 12.04, and it'll grab that box for you if you don't already have it. Same thing goes for EC2. If you spin up against EC2, it's really cool. No matter what region you're spinning up in, it grabs the right AMIs because they're not cross-region. The last section and the most important part really is the suites. This is basically what a simple suite looks like. You just want to have one server. You run an Apache recipe. Then we want to have a second server. We want to run Apache and PHP 5. This lets you spin up multiple instances or servers, whatever you want to call it, and run tests against them or do whatever you would like. So then you can do something like Kitchen Converge, which lets you spin up a box and bootstrap it with Chef. And you can do a specific server, and then you can destroy it, or you can just run Kitchen Converge and spin them all up. It basically wraps a lot of the core functionality that we were just talking about in Vagrant and does it in a very helpful way. So a few other things that you can do. You can set specific attributes. If you're familiar with Chef, you can basically just set your attributes that you would be overriding. So for instance, locally, I want to set a specific IP on a service. You can just override that in your Test Kitchen file. You can set the memory for each container. So if you're spinning up a database cluster locally, you're going to want to give it a few more megs than I think the default is like 256 megs. So you can bump that up. You can bump up the CPU. You can also change your networking. So if you're familiar with Vagrant, this is very similar. This is actually directly from the Kitchen Vagrant plugin. But you can assign an IP to a node, or you can forward ports, and it makes your life way easier when you're testing things. And of course, then there's things like Kitchen EC2, where you can set your access key and all of that stuff for Test Kitchen against EC2. Another good thing to take a look at is Test Kitchen and Travis. Probably like a month ago, Jeff back there and Eric Harrett did a talk at the Boston Chef Meetup on using Travis and Test Kitchen, and it's amazing. Unfortunately, at PayPal, we're kind of like closed in. We don't get to use Travis. But we use Jenkins for the same type of stuff, where we have automated tests that spin up Test Kitchen in OpenStack. And it's amazing being able to use Travis. So check that out, Evertrue on GitHub. Okay, so let's create a basic cookbook and see what it looks like to test something. I use Berkshelf to create my cookbooks. It makes life pretty easy. So let's just make an Apache cookbook real fast. Once you create a cookbook, this is basically what it looks like, the regular Chef infrastructure for a cookbook. So let's go and look at the Kitchen YAML file. This is, oh man, there we go. That's the Kitchen YAML file. So it's, as you can see here, it's pretty basic, but let's actually see what that does in a Converge. So this is what it would look like. It starts up an instance in Vagrant in VirtualBox, and then it downloads Chef, and it'll start converging it. But right now there's nothing in this recipe, so let's add something. Let's install Apache. It's as simple as include Apache, and then you also include it in your metadata. If you're familiar with Chef, you can get bit by that. Oh, okay. So you see it actually errored out. which is something that Test Kitchen really helps you figure out. Basically, it's trying to download the packages, but it can't find them. Well, if you've ever done anything ever with apt, you know that's probably because you never did apt-get update. So let's fix that. And Test Kitchen makes it really easy to fix a problem like that. We're just going to check to see what operating system we're running on and include apt or yum cookbooks to solve that problem real fast. And then you see it actually converges properly and your problem is solved. And that's a really simple workflow for like how Test Kitchen makes your life easier. But you know, before it was really, really painful, and now it's that simple to find a small problem like this. So that's pretty cool. Let's do something a little more complicated. Has anyone here used Console? No, or yes, okay. So Console is by the same guys as Vagrant, HashiCorp. And so I worked on a cookbook for them for locally, or for PayPal recently to spin up Console. The cool thing about it is I was able to build the whole thing locally before shipping it off to the cloud. So this is a basic cookbook that I duplicated. And the problem is with Console, it's a service discovery platform, but you really should have more than one server running in the cloud at a given time so that you can always have your services. So I wanted to be able to actually set up kind of a cluster locally and clients for that cluster and be able to test the interaction and everything. So Test Kitchen makes this really easy. So here's a server recipe that basically just sets some override attributes specific to the server, puts it in cluster mode. It actually does a chef search, which we can fake out here in Test Kitchen. It says what servers it finds, and then it runs the Console recipe and all of that. Very similar also for the client. We just set it as client mode, do a chef search to find our servers, and then include the recipe. Pretty basic. And then we're going to look at the Test Kitchen YAML file. This is basically, we're using Vagrant. The provisioner, we're going to use Chef 0. Chef 0, the difference between Chef 0 and Chef Solo, Chef 0 spins up an in-memory Chef server, and it's awesome. It lets you do chef searches the same way you would against the chef server, and you don't have to make any ifs or anything special in your code. It just always works generally the same way it would against the real chef server. Then right below it, I have this special section called node path, and that lets you basically mock out nodes, or you can do that for different things within Chef, and you just provide a directory. So I actually have a directory here in my test called fixtures nodes, and I have my different nodes mocked out here. So what this allows us to do is when Chef client runs, it loads these JSON nodes onto the box, loads them into Chef 0, and when it does the chef search, it actually finds some data. So that's pretty much it, and then we have our suites, a first server, a second server, third server, and a client. Each one I've also assigned an IP through the networking, and then Console also requires a bind address, and it was picking the wrong bind address, so I added the attribute there as well. So if we go into Console now, big enough? Is that big enough? Okay. So if we run kitchen converge, I actually cheated and I'm already running it so that I don't have to download everything through Adam's phone, luckily. But right now we're spinning up the full cluster of Console locally, 3 boxes or 4 boxes, and it's already run, but it's pretty cool because it's all local. It's doing these searches to save you some time. And so here's the console. And so it's up, all 3 are communicating because they know how to communicate with each other because they're on ports, which we mocked out with Test Kitchen. So it makes testing everything locally really easy. It's actually the way that our team started doing some of this is when we actually got Enterprise Chef. We were like, well, we've been playing with Test Kitchen. We want to do more of this. And I was like, could we have a cookbook to do this all locally? And they were like, yeah, we can. And we did. And it's awesome. And it's made our lives so much easier that I can spin up our chef server locally before I push it to production. Okay, so let's get back to this. All right, so the last couple things, I just wanted to show a few more things. Verify. It's the last step in test kitchen runs. You can actually just run the word kitchen test, and it'll run all of your tests and everything. It spins up the instance, bootstraps it with Chef, then it'll run your tests that they're going to talk about in just a sec. Verify just does that last part. So you can break it into pieces. Let's say you want to just set up the boxes. You can just create the boxes. If you want to do converge, it just converges the box. Or verify like this will actually just test and leave the boxes up afterwards. Now, the one thing that I always had problems with is like, okay, so I get the basics of Test Kitchen, but what are some cool things I can do to make my life a little bit easier? So I've tried to put down a few things that I've learned. The number one thing is where the hell on these boxes does it put stuff? It's under temp kitchen. It's not under the regular chef directory. So if you go there, it actually has everything that would be in the chef server mocked up. So if you spin up a server and you want to see what all the nodes look like afterwards, it's right in there. It's in JSON, so it's pretty easy. Another thing is, if you can point to all of those different things, you can actually just run chef client on that box. You just give it a command just like this, chef client-z, you give it the config file in that directory, and you pass it the JSON. You don't actually have to use Test Kitchen once you spin it up if you're SSH'd on the box already. You can also do concurrency. So if you're doing a ton of tests, this makes your life a little bit easier. You just do like kitchen test, throw a -c and a number after it. The only problem with that is sometimes it can be a little bit confusing if one of them blows up, figuring out which actual box blew up. We were talking a little bit earlier about synced folders with Vagrant. You can actually do that with Test Kitchen as well, like I mentioned, but it saves you a lot of time when you're actually doing big files. I work, like I said, at PayPal, and I think on average we download Java from Oracle about 10,000 times an hour. They block that by the end of the hour. So I have to do this. This is actually for Chef, but I do this for Java as well. That I just have Java saved on my local box, and then you can use sync folders to move it to the server, and then to your instance, and then you can mount it and override the attributes of where that actually is. Depends on the cookbook you're using though. Once you've done that, oh, actually the cool thing about this also is that's kitchen.local.yaml. Your general test kitchen is .kitchen.yaml. This kitchen.local.yaml you can put in the same directory, put in your git ignore so it's not checked in, so that you don't have to keep this in your repo. No one else has to really see this. It just makes your life easier locally. And the cool thing about that is once you've done that once, you can kind of reuse that. So on my computer, I have a directory of kitchen files that I just will, source. And if you set this kitchen local YAML variable to that file, you can just override certain things. So this also works if you want to just always locally spin up a certain size box. You can force that with just setting this environment variable. And last but not least is fixtures, like I was talking about earlier. There's a really good page on the Chef docs on the config for kitchen YAML. And one of the best parts about it is where it explains all these different paths and things you can mock up. So you can mock up cookbooks. Like if you're writing an LWRP in Chef, the only way to really test that with Test Kitchen would be to make another cookbook. So using tools like the config YAML docs really help with a lot of that. Beyond that, that's most of what I have. Check out kitchen.ci. That's a great resource. Docs.chef, getchef.com. The Test Kitchen or on GitHub actually has most of the Test Kitchen plugins and everything inside of it, so it's easy just to go there. And this presentation is also on GitHub if you guys want to take a look. So thank you so much. Sure. Do you guys have any questions? Sorry, I moved fast. All right.
Good job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, more pizzas came in, so if anybody's still hungry, definitely grab it now while Dustin sets up.
Let's do a 5-minute intermission for pizza. All right, let's do this. Huh? Go ahead, sit down, people. I can't whistle.
Check, 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 check. All right, if you guys want to get back to your seats, we're going to start this off again. Or not. Do you have everything plugged in?
Yeah. All right, I'm just going to start talking. Who here has used server spec before? Not many people. Okay. I'm just going to make this all up. Okay, so what is server spec? Server spec is our spec tests for your servers configured by Puppet, Chef, or anything else. It was written by, I don't even want to try. It's based on RSpec, the Ruby testing DSL, domain specific language. And version 2 was actually just released on October 3rd. It has a lot of improvements in it. Okay, so what does that mean? So server spec is a test DSL in Ruby that exposes resources that you can use to write tests for your infrastructure. So there are a lot of resources here. You can see we have cron, file, service, a bunch of these. So you pass parameters to these resources and you make checks on them, like this file is owned by www data. This file exists. This directory exists. This service is running. Things like this. All these things that you might otherwise do with ps-aux or pipe it to grep, see if something's running. This just provides a nicer way to write tests for it. And this is pretty important for cross-functional teams because not everybody is a bash wizard. Okay, so here's an example of a server spec test. So here I am describing a chef cookbook that installs and configures and starts Nginx. Can everybody see that okay? Okay, so the syntax here is a little funky if you're not used to our spec, but it kind of just reads pretty nicely. So expect the package to be installed, expect this file to be in the right place and owned by the right person, expect the service to be enabled and running, and also expect port 80 to be listening. And so each of these things like package, file, service, and port are the resources that you run your tests on. So my setup for this, and it's maybe a little complicated, but it's super fast. So I have Docker set up via boot to Docker via Vagrant because I develop on OS 10, so I don't have Docker native. So basically boot to Docker just sets up a Vagrant machine, installs Docker into it, installs the Docker binary on your OS X, and then just lets them talk to each other. So you can spin up Docker images without really having to know the details of it. I'm also using Chef via Chef DK. If you guys are using Chef and you're not using Chef DK, really consider it. It just bundles everything together. All of the different plugins. So I don't know, people have used Chef for a while. If I bring up the JSON gem, they might get a little angry because there are always compatibility issues. But this just bundles them all together, all the Chef tools. So Kitchen, server spec, everything. And you can delete your gem files from your cookbook repos. It's always great. So these two come together into Test Kitchen. And I'm using the Kitchen Docker driver to use Docker as my provisioner because it's roughly twice as fast as using Vagrant as your provisioner. And I don't like to wait for things. And then server spec is running on top of that. Okay, so my workflow for infrastructure testing was server spec. I launch boot to Docker if it's not already up. I converge via Kitchen. I verify via Kitchen. This is before I make any changes. So, all right, is this cookbook good? Can I develop on it? Hopefully it is. And then my cookbook needs to change. I'm doing some story, some feature. So I write a server spec test on a new behavior. I converge it, I verify it, and the test should fail. So I just keep adding to the cookbook until the tests I wrote at first are passing. And then I release. So I put this link at the bottom. It's a blog post about somebody who's using the Ruby tool guard to basically do this step here, this converge verify step, every time their test file changes. So it really develops this fast feedback loop while you're working on things. Demo. Okay, let's make that bigger. Everyone see that? Okay. All right, so I made a Git repo as an example for this. It's in the slides too, so you guys can do this on your own. Basically, here we have this same Nginx cookbook I described in the previous slide. So I don't want to enable the default site. I include the recipe Nginx. I place this file. I'm just hard coding it in for sake of brevity. And then when I place this file and site's enabled, Nginx, the service will notice that and reload the service. And so then in my spec, it's the same as I already mentioned. So package is installed, the config file is in place, the service is running, and it's listening on the port. Back to terminal. Okay. So I'm using Kitchen for this. And of course, I already cheated. I converged it and verified it already because I don't trust demos. all this Docker crap, this output is actually a bug in the kitchen Docker gem that has been fixed but not released yet, so just ignore that. So here I want to say kitchen verify. All right, so it's uploading my test suites, and then it's running it, and then you can see the thing I described is all passing, and that took 1.5 seconds, which is pretty good. Okay, wait, I have to use chef to use service spec, kneel before SSH. You can use it for anything. So if you have a unicorn server, if you have this is really nice. So if you're trying to make the DevOps transition and you have this server that has been set up by you or someone else and nobody really understands what's on it, you can write service spec tests for it and start running it against it to verify your assumptions about what are on the server. And then you can use those assumptions and those tests that are now passing to deconstruct that server into cookbooks, modules, whatever you want, whatever tool you want to use. That's pretty powerful. Otherwise, you have to do things like, there's a Python library called Blueprint that you can run on that kind of creates a chef cookbook for you, but kind of doesn't work. I found this a lot more reliable. And then right here, on the right here is the config. So if you're using Kitchen, you can use the exec backend. If you are not using Kitchen, you use the SSH backend. You can do things like prompt the users for their pseudo passwords and all that stuff. Okay, and one of the big points here, because I recently worked at a place that had to make sure everything ran on Ubuntu and CentOS. So these resources I listed at the beginning of the presentation, most of them are compatible. So when I say, I expect the package MySQL to be installed, on Debian it'll look to apps, on CentOS it'll look to Yum, whatever the certain platform is. And so I pulled this list off the server spec site, and it listed all of these things. And I've tried Debian, Ubuntu, CentOS, and Windows just to see what happened. Those all worked, but then they had this asterisk next to it that not all platforms are fully supported. So if you're running Solaris or AIX or something, I don't know. But it's open source, so you can put those in. Okay, so there's two ways to install server spec and use server spec. The first way is using Test Kitchen. So if you have a project set up, Chef Cookbook, a Puppet module, whatever, you just make this directory called tests. You make a directory under that called integration. And then this third directory here where it says server spec. This is the busser that Test Kitchen is going to use. So I'll go over the bussers in the next slide. But basically by creating this folder and naming it like this, when Test Kitchen runs, it knows to go ahead and install that busser and set it all up. So you don't have to gem install it or anything like that. And then the folder under that is the suite name. So that maps directly to the suite name in Test Kitchen. So just name them the same thing when you want to run suite 1, call this suite 1, it'll run suite 1. The other way is standalone, it's just a gem. You can install it. Okay, and there are some alternatives to server spec. So the one that comes by default with Kitchen is called BATS, Bash Automated Testing System. It's linked to here. And so the pro is it's all bash. It's the default. The con is it's all bash. And cross-platform gets hard because when you're writing BATS tests, you're just writing bash. So you're doing things like apt-cache show MySQL and then grepping it to make sure the exit code is 0. And so if you're trying to do that on CentOS as well, it gets a little harder. And to my point before, not everybody knows all of the arguments to sed or awk or something. Like if somebody's a Ruby developer, this is a lot nicer for them, or Python, or basically not a sysadmin. And then we have mini test chef handler, and this also has the RSpec syntax. And the really nice thing about this is that it gives you access to chef's run status, node, and run context, so you can check what things have been set during your chef converge. The minus here is that it's chef only. And I've thought about this a little bit, and I feel like I don't know how much of a benefit it is, because doing things like checking the run status node and run context, for me anyway, I write chef specs tests to do that. So if I have any branching in my cookbooks on node status or setting it, I'll test that with unit tests. So the stuff on server spec is kind of, I don't care if you're running chef, I don't care if you're running Puppet, what is the state of the system after I've converged? The other one is Cucumber. So that's also a Ruby tool, and it's more behavior-driven development. So you have spec files with features, and it's like, I don't know, BDD, who's familiar with this kind of system? Okay. Basically, it's set up so ideally a project manager is supposed to be able to hand you a text document, and then you make sure the specs pass. The negative I saw for this looking around is that, so there is a busser for this, but it's not really well documented, and it requires a few more steps to set up than server spec or really any of these. For the Python folks, we have nvsert. So this is just kind of a thin wrapper around Fabric. So Fabric is a remote execution tool that basically SSHs into servers in parallel. And this just wraps it to provide the same sort of resources that server spec does. So you have like a expect file, blah, blah, blah. The thing about this is that even if you are a Python shop, I would not really recommend you use this, because it's only at release 0.17, and I think it's on Bitbucket, and there were 10 followers. So I don't know. There's probably more. I didn't look. Okay, questions. Well, I mean, so when I'm using server spec, I just go to serverspec.org. I click on the resource types, and these map to the things I put. So, okay, I want to check out what this file is, but I don't really know what kind of tests I can run it. You just click File, and they're all in here. The only thing about this documentation is it's using the should syntax of RSpec instead of the expect syntax. He talks about this at the top here. Basically, that expect is more correct, and that's the one I use, but he likes the way should looks better. So if you look at this link in the documentation here, and you're okay using should, you can use the docs as they are. Otherwise, you're going to have to mentally translate it to expect. Anything else? What don't I like about it? I don't know. I mean, it seems pretty solid for me. I used to have problems with managing gem dependencies and having different versions of server spec running. But since switching over to ChefDK, when I know my test kitchen version is stable, it'll install the stable version of server spec. And I don't have, other than this whole problem with the docs with the should versus expect, I don't have any concerns with it. I mean, the downside is it's in Ruby. So if you're a Java shop or a Python shop or something, you have to figure out some sort of Ruby setup. So you have to run it in CI, you have to figure all that out. But I'm sure you guys can think of more. Okay, anything else? All right, so everybody will be using Test Kitchen and Server Spec by the end of the month. Yep. Yep, and I'll post these online to the meetup group too.
Yeah, all slides will be posted back to the site, so you'll be able to go back and get references.
All right, thanks guys. All right, who's talking about aptly?
Ah, that should be fine. Thanks, though. Where is? Where's the actual adapter? There you go. Okay, yeah, slid down. All right. There we go. Cool. Glad that actually worked. So my name's Dan Norris. I am a software engineer at Acquia. For those of you who don't know, that's basically the corporate entity behind Drupal. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is a tool called Aptly. So just a quick question. How many people are running Debian or Ubuntu in production right now? Okay. Out of that group, maybe, how many people are running their own custom repositories? Only a few. Okay. So this may not apply to a whole bunch of people, but that's all right. We're going to go through it. So what Aptly is, it's basically a tool for managing custom repositories. There we go. And actually, it is the best tool that I've found. I've used a couple other ones, namely RepRepro. They've all got kind of their upsides and downsides. This basically does everything for you. One of the key features that I like that sold me on it immediately was the fact that it lets you have multiple package versions actually in your repository. You'd think that wouldn't actually be that hard, except that RepRepro does not let you do that. So if you were to say upgrade Postgres, or you wanted to release a new package, you can only have the latest version of that package in your repository. Not really great in case there are bugs or you have to roll back or anything like that. Also, again, you can create custom repos, which is pretty useful. If I could, there we go, actually use a Mac. So one of the things also is nice about it, it's written in Go. So if you ever have to extend it, it's pretty convenient, at least if you know Go or willing to actually kind of put in some effort. It's got built-in support for uploading things to S3, which is pretty cool. You don't have to use like S3 CMD sync or the SDK or anything like that. You manage multiple distributions in the same mirror or repo, and I'll explain there is a distinction between those two entities. But so if I am managing a repository for say, you know, Precise and Trusty and maybe even Debian, I can put all of those packages in the same, or they can all be managed by Aptly at once, and then it's smart enough to figure out like where all of those packages need to go, and you can upload them all separately. And the other thing is, it's really nice, is that you can actually merge the official mirrors with the custom repository that you make. So we use that because we manage roughly like 9,000 EC2 instances right now. Those are running constantly. And so, as you can imagine, actually keeping all those packages up to date and knowing which servers have which versions of each package for auditing purposes is really difficult. So we actually create our own custom mirrors for that sort of thing, which we can then slow roll and release. So anytime we do an apt-get update, apt-get upgrade, we know exactly what's on the machine and we don't have to worry about things restarting. And so the workflow is interesting, at least as from a high level. So there are two different things that Aptly looks at. You can either work with mirrors or you can work with local repositories. They're actually two separate commands. Essentially what you end up doing is, toward the end of it, is you end up just creating a local repository anyway. They all have very similar kind of commands. So, and by mirror, I mean like you can basically, it knows how to bring down an actual copy of a full official Ubuntu mirror. So if I wanted to mirror the official Trusty mirrors from EC2, I can go and do that. I combine that with a custom repository or a number of them. So say if I'm tracking upstream Postgres or I'm building my own custom packages, I can kind of merge all that together and have just one sources.list endpoint to kind of keep up to date. The other big thing about Aptly is that you can take snapshots of your repositories. So a snapshot is basically just all of the packages that you have in your repository at one point in time. So we use that basically to say, so if I release version 1.6 of our platform, I know exactly what's going to be in that repository for every single package that will ever be installed on that Ubuntu machine. Very, very convenient because you can merge snapshots, you can pull individual things. So for example, if you needed to upgrade OpenSSL because of Heartbleed, you can basically pull the new version of the OpenSSL package straight from an Ubuntu mirror into your snapshot, and you can push that out as your own repository. And publishing is a separate step. Publishing basically means take all the packages that I have and write out an actual apt repository with all the appropriate metadata. That's the thing you actually push to S3 or put on a web server or put in CloudFront, however you actually go about doing that. On a Mac, if you actually want to try it, it's really, really easy. It's brew install aptly. You can thank one of my coworkers for that because he got really annoyed at having to install it from source or download binary. On Ubuntu, it's a little bit more challenging. This is basically the directions they give. I condensed them a little bit, so you can just run it as essentially just a handful of commands. You can also just download a binary. It's Go, so it's compiled for pretty much everything. You just basically need to either download it, or if you're on Ubuntu or Debian, it's nice to kind of keep up to date because you can just apt-get update, apt-get upgrade it, and you'd be good. There's some cool plan features, namely support for Yum repositories. So maybe this will actually be useful for anybody who's using RHEL or CentOS, anything like that. He's looking at adding a REST API, which is kind of cool. Essentially, one of the things that you can do with this is you can actually have the tool itself serve your repositories over HTTP. This way you could have a little web server that you can interact with. Kind of interesting. I don't know if it's necessarily a game changer. It also support for different translations. And if you want more info, docs are at aptly.com/docs/overview. They're actually really, really good. There's one of the best sets of documentation I've seen for a tool lately. GitHub, if you need to change anything or take a look at the source. And also the tutorials are also at aptly.info, and they're really, really good. If you want to start toying around with stuff, I definitely would take a look at the tutorials first, and then maybe take a look at the docs. It's a really easy tool to use. You just kind of have to get your mind around that workflow. And that's basically all I got. Anything else? Questions? Yeah. We said lightning talk, so I made sure. All right, if there's nothing, I'm out. Thanks, guys.
Tom's going to talk about that.
Okay, how do I change the resolution on this? How do I change the resolution on this?
What, fix it if you go under presentation mode?
I don't even know how to get.
Like the top. Oh, is it this thing?
Oh, cool. All right, perfect. There we go. Thank you. All right, so I'm Tom McLaughlin. I'm a infrastructure engineer on the tech ops team over at HubSpot. We're a inbound marketing SaaS company, and if you don't know what inbound marketing is, I didn't know for the first several months there, but it's all good. Pretty much boils down to be interesting on social media, so that way people actually want to get spammed by you. So, really blunt way to put it. Hopefully no one that I work with hears that. So yeah, we try and automate as much as we can, which is a pretty common theme here tonight. Anyone here build OS images? Okay, handful of you. Nobody else builds OS images that much. Think Vagrant images, Docker images, any of that sort of stuff, not just say like VMware templates or whatever. Okay, about 5 of you, awesome.
Well, you also mean AMIs, right?
Yes, AMIs as well. Okay, excellent, there we go. I'm pretty sure most of you don't like the process. It's, at least for us, it was time consuming. It was totally error prone and pretty much sucked. Anytime there was someone that said, I just need a really small change to the image, it's like, awesome, that's gonna take me about 3 hours. Thanks, guys. That also caused a lot of friction between teams and a lot of unhappiness. So what I'm gonna talk about is Packer, which will make image building suck a little less. So what is Packer? It's a HashiCorp tool. We've already talked about Vagrant. Again, HashiCorp, makers of Vagrant, Terraform, Consul. Packer allows you to create OS images for multiple platforms from a single source definition. So by using templates, it lets you describe an OS once and build it for many different platforms. So and as a platform, think AWS, OpenStack, VMware, etc. So we want our images to be identical. Our application should run on same looking systems regardless of the virtualization platform. Our app developers shouldn't have to care or deal with those sort of platform differences. It should just be, I deploy my application, no matter where it's running, it should pretty much just work. Even identical twins vary slightly. So by identical, we mean exactly the same except for some minor platform differences. Biggest thing is, so I support EC2 and Vagrant images. I don't want my EC2 images to have the Vagrant user with the Vagrant password, out in production. That would be really bad. So, all right. So why use Packer? It makes it easier to build identical images for multiple platforms. And these days, it's not uncommon to have to support multiple platforms. My last job, we had VMware in production. One group was experimenting with AWS. Developers were running something locally. What we understand was somebody put together an image and just kept passing it around. That image, no clue if it looked at all like our production stuff, but it's fine. Of course, we want our images to have, we want them to have consistency. We want to prevent the accidental screw-ups. We don't want to hear, but I was testing my stuff locally, it worked, and then it went into, our hosting environment and it just blew everything up. No, we don't want that. For the OS maintainer like me and about 5 other people here, we want to reduce the amount of work that it takes to actually build these images. We want to be able to crank them out faster. So when CentOS 7 came out, my old process would have been, all right, go into VirtualBox, create a VM, mount the ISO, let it run for about 15, 20 minutes after pointing it to a kickstart, export the disk from VirtualBox, use EC2 AMI tools to reprocess the disk, send that up, register it. Awesome, I've got one image done. I now need to reprocess that image to get a PowerVert, the PowerVert image. And then my Vagrant one, that's a whole nother set of work. Yesterday, we actually just added a 4th one. So now we have AWS PowerVert, AWS HVM, AWS HVM with SR-IOV support, and Vagrant. So every time I want to do a new OS instance, I have to build 4 images. Oops. So, all right, so using Packer. Templates is what you use to define a build and divide into 3 or 4 sections. The variables section is optional, makes life easier. It's just some information, just gonna reuse throughout other parts of the file. Your builders define the platforms you're gonna build for. Your provisioners are what you're gonna do the image after you've built it. And your post processors are, okay, I've created this image, what do I do with it after that? So let's take, whoops. You want to see a pretty, let's see if it comes back. There we go. You know how to zoom in MacVim? I always forget this. Command plus. All right. Yeah, here's a pretty basic example. Yeah, I learned that once before when I gave this presentation. I really do need to change the slide. Really basically up the top, I just set my OS version, I set where to download the ISO from, I set the checksum. Boot command just telling it, okay, you're gonna grab a kickstart file. Our type, virtual, we're gonna create a VirtualBox instance using the ISO method. There's also a method for VirtualBox to recreate from the existing VirtualBox. So forth and so forth. Here, the ISO information just coming from there. Provisioners, here's this shell script we're going to run, and then at the end, here's a post processor that's just going to create a vagrant box. Yeah, I got to change that slide. So, all right. So yeah, going through this again. Here's our variables. Again, reusable values to be used within other sections of the templates. Mostly, again, I use this for just defining like OS version information, CentOS 6.5 versus CentOS 6.6 and so forth. Another nice thing about using variables in your templates, you can override them via the command line. So for instance, I want to debug why my build's not working. I have headless in there set to true. Now, if I'm like, you know what, let's get some debugging in here, just tack on -var headless equals false. Great. Now it's actually going to build the template, but build it with VirtualBox running in front of me, so I can see what's going wrong. Another benefit to using variable section, you can take that entire section, you can drop it into a different file. That's useful. Say you have CentOS 6.6 and CentOS 7.0. The process for building those two is pretty much exactly the same. Great. I'll have a variables file for CentOS 6.6. I'll have a variable file for CentOS 7, and I'm just going to pass either one of those into my AWS template. So okay, our builders. This is where we list the platforms to build for and how they should be built. In this one, I'm doing a kickstart install from an ISO image. Yes, I'm building VirtualBox from an ISO image using Kickstart. I don't have it here, but you can define multiple builders. So for instance, I could have a VirtualBox ISO. I could be creating, I could also tack on after that an AWS instance to build. There's a couple different ways it'll build AWS instances. You can build EBS or instance store backed. It'll also use the old change root method for creating your image. You can tack on VMware, you can tack on OpenStack, you can tack on Docker at the end if you really wanted to. So our provisioners, if you're familiar with Kickstart, think of it as the post section of your Kickstart. This is the OS has gone through its installation, it's now rebooted, and here's a list of things to do to it. This might be like scrubbing MAC addresses out of your network configuration files, resetting host names. In this one, I just use shell scripts, but you can use Puppet in either an agent or a masterless way. You can use Chef or so forth. And if you see, I think all the way at the end on the bottom of this one, we run server spec. So at the end of our build process, we then launch server spec and we make sure, did this image come out the way we expect it to? So we have tests to see, is the right version of Puppet installed? Is this package actually installed that we expect? We also add things, for instance, our AWS images have a spec test that says, is the vagrant user not in here? Is the HS image user, which we use for certain building functions, is that not in here anymore? Just making sure, good. We've cleaned out the stuff during one of the earlier provisioners, and we're cool. Post processors, these are things to do to your image after you've done your provisioners. It's shut down. Most common one people will probably use is, great, take this image that I've produced and turn it into a vagrant box. There's another one for take this image and send it up to VMware vSphere. Honestly, post processors I found to be kind of limited. I didn't really find a use for a lot of them, so your mileage may vary on that area. So, okay, tying all this together. Here we go, basic commands. There's only 4 of them. You see here, build, fix, inspect, and validate. Fix you will never use. I've never had a reason to use this. I guess there was a difference in the old template format at one point. This will take an older template and fix it for the new version. If you're just starting off with Packer, great, you will never use this. Packer inspect displays the information about the relevant information about the template. So it's going to show you the variables that you've set up at the top. It's going to show you that the builder. So in this case, yeah, I'm just building a virtual box instance via an OVF. And you see at the end, the provisioner is it's going to run a shell provisioner. It's going to run the file provisioner, then the shell provisioner again. It's just an easy way to see what's going on in the template without you having to actually like peel through the JSON, which can get a little eye bleeding at times. Validate, just make sure that your JSON is syntactically correct. My editor does that for me, so I've never used this command. And finally, put this all together. Packer build, and then the template in this one is CentOS 65 x86 64. Yeah, this is the basic output here. It's downloading VirtualBox guest editions if you're doing a VirtualBox build. And right here, creating the virtual machine, creating the hard drive, setting up the SSH session, starting the virtual machine, waiting for it to boot. Okay, you get down to right around here. The gap between here and here is about like 10-15 minutes. It would be kind of nice if it would actually told you what was going on. In between that little spot, it's actually just doing the installation. So this might be useful. It might be useful again to bring up the VirtualBox head if you really want to, just to make sure that's actually going correctly. After that, let's see. SSH is in, runs your provisioners, does all the configuration that you want. I don't have any provisioners on this one because I wanted everything to fit on one slide. After you're done with your provisioners, it's going to export your virtual machine, so forth, get down to the post processor, and here it's just outputting along the bottom there. It's just outputting my Vagrant files. So some of the resources for it, there's the home page. The documentation I found overall to be pretty good. It was confusing at some times, but for the most part, I found everything I needed to be in the documentation except for like 1 or 2 questions I had to ask on IRC. I have heard complaints that the documentation examples don't always work. There are some bugs in there. You can't just copy and paste stuff. So I suggest you're going to start creating something from scratch. Read through all the documentation, make sure you actually have all the necessary stuff defined and so forth. Plugins, there's no central repository for plugins unless you count GitHub as central repository. Do your searching, just search for, say, git-builder, and then you will find some extra builders. I think there's some of the unofficially supported platforms, LXC, SoftLayer. There are plugins that exist on GitHub that you can then download. Also, make sure you have Golang installed. I didn't have that installed on my Mac when I first started looking at this, and kind of bypassed using a few plugins because I just didn't feel like taking the time to install that because I had no clue what was going on there. Oops. Oops, hold on 1 second. If you're looking for help, there is Pound Packer tool on Freenode. It's very quiet on there. Today, someone thanked me for answering 2 of his questions with, "I don't know, I've never done that before," because he was just happy somebody responded in the room. So I mean, yeah, I've been fortunate that some of the, like the 2 questions I have had, someone actually did respond to them, but it is a very quiet room. There is a mailing list. It's about 1 to 2, maybe 3 messages a day. Mitchell Hashimoto tends to actually answer stuff. So that's actually pretty good. That's probably a better place to find information than going on to IRC. So Packer's limitations. We found actually a few of them for some of our needs. So first off, the EC2 builder, for instance-backed AMIs, requires an existing AMI. That breaks our chain of control over the OS. We make sure we create all of our OS images from scratch. We feel that that's an important thing, primarily for auditors, to be able to say, yes, we know where this image started, and we know, exactly how it got there. We don't want to be using certain, just anything that we find from the Amazon marketplace. So say like when CentOS 7 came out, Red Hat only releases an HVM version. I had to find some random group in like the Asia Pacific region that had released a 7.0 PowerVert instance. And again, we just can't do that for actual production usage. Another issue with that would be, so we have this AMI of unknown origin, unknown build. I'm trying to create a Vagrant instance for our developers to use. I have no clue how to actually recreate that AMI as a Vagrant instance, because I just don't know how that AMI was initially created. There's no builder for EC2 HVM images. I'll put a caveat, sort of. HVM images, for us, we create a VirtualBox instance, and we just do a raw export of the disk from VirtualBox, and that's our sort of thing. So our builder in that case is just VirtualBox ISO. Gets a little harder because you cannot have the same builder listed twice in a Packer build file. So if we want to create an AWS HVM image and a Vagrant image, well, both of those are VirtualBox ISO in our case. That's going to cause Packer to kind of die. There's also no logic to associate there's no logic in the templates to associate a provisioner or post processor with a particular builder. So I couldn't have 3 builders listed and list, a post processor for a Vagrant box and say, you know what, only create the Vagrant box from the second builder that you executed, ignore the other ones. So that would have just tacked on a bunch of extra time to our build process. And there's also no way to, so every single build in our case would be fully kickstarted, and there's no way to save time by sort of breaking up the build into multiple stages where, say, kickstart a master image. Okay, great, now reprocess that master image and create an AWS PowerVert image, create our HVM image, and create our Vagrant image from there. So again, we would be building three hosts in serial, all kickstarted, about 20 minutes a piece, instead of just, okay, build it once and then just minor reprocessing along the way. Yeah. And so, any questions? I know I made it sound like it really doesn't, there's a lot of problems with it. We ended up actually writing an entire tool around Packer and breaking it down into rake tasks that actually create different stages. So like I'd mentioned before, we have a tool that will go ahead, create our master artifact from VirtualBox, and then we use the VirtualBox OVF to actually import that master artifact, reprocess it for AWS multiple times, reprocess it for Vagrant, and so forth. We have, so
so this is the layout of our tool that we use to wrap everything. These are var files only, so CentOS 6.5, CentOS 7.0. Just added a CentOS 6.6 file. Copying the 6.5, changing 6.5 to 6.6, various places. So that's where we keep all our OS information. We go here. Those are actual kickstarts for each OS. Again, when I did 6.6, I copied 6.5 and just created the 6.6 file. And then we pass all that we pass that stuff down here to the different image templates. As one of the tasks in what I built around this, actually archive the image. So our AWS image, the master artifacts, actually go into an S3 bucket. So if in case we actually need to rebuild our 6.5 image because it got damaged or whatever reason, we can fetch that from S3, we can reprocess it, and we can just re-register it. So we wouldn't, in that case, have to rebuild it from scratch. It did come up today with talking with somebody, he would actually prefer that we were able to reprocess that, or we were able to rebuild something from scratch. So we'll probably start doing is in the artifacts, we'll just be incorporating the SHA from the build system and saying, here's CentOS 6.6 that was built at this version of our build system. If you need to rebuild this, great. Just check out that SHA and you can rebuild everything from scratch. Or what? Right. So we have the common directory. It's really just an organizational thing. That's why I make sure NIT cleanup is not at the end, and a few other things. It's really just organizational, and you just have to know that, yeah, these are the scripts that need to be run in the AWS HVM builder. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you. All right, that's going to be the last talk for today. We are going to have all the presenters. If you guys can just post to the site your slides, and that's the way we communicate afterwards. We definitely love to have some feedback from you guys on what you'd like to see, or if you think the presentation night went well, if it was helpful. Because the whole thing about this is really getting that type of feedback. Really gives Dustin and I an idea as to how to set up and stage the next meetup. We want this to be valuable. You guys are donating, coming in on your own time, so we want to make sure you got a lot of takeaways from the end of these type presentations. Want to thank Aaron and the Bright Cove team for hosting the event and also supplying some good beverages and pizza. Thank you, Bright Cove. Want to thank all of our presenters, for getting up here. It's definitely difficult to be getting in front of peers. You guys are all smart people, so it is a challenge. But want to say thank you to all of you guys. And in the spirit of DevOps, I'd like to invite everybody over to Debo. If you guys are open to having some drinks, on a Wednesday night, I'll be there. I'll even get the first round, so it's right up the street. Just some housekeeping notes. If you guys can make sure, whatever cans and recyclables go over here to the left in the recycling bin, and if you can just clean up around you, that'd be great. That way, Bright Cove, will invite us back rather than ban the Boston DevOps. Thank you again. Really appreciate it. Have a great night, guys. Be safe.